In the quiet town of Midwich, something mysterious moved through the sky, landing near the coast. Dr. Allen woke up to a strange whispering noise in the middle of the night. His wife, Barbara, told him it was just his imagination, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next morning, Frank dropped his wife, Jill, off at the school where she worked before heading out of town for a construction job. The town was buzzing with excitement as many people gathered at the local school for a festival. But as the clock struck 10 a.m., everything changed. Every person, pet, and wild animal suddenly collapsed where they stood. Cars crashed, people slumped over, and just before Frank could cross the town border, he too passed out. His car veered off the road and exploded on impact. Authorities from neighboring towns arrived to investigate. The first two officers who stepped past the town's border instantly collapsed, just like the others. The rest of the team marked the invisible boundary with a white line. Soon, special forces and scientists arrived, led by Susan, an epidemiologist working for the government. Dr. Allen, who had left town earlier for work, rushed back upon hearing the news, but when he tried to enter, he was stopped. An officer attempted to cross while wearing a protective mask, but he too fell unconscious and had to be pulled back with a rope. Allen suspected some kind of chemical gas, but Susan dismissed the idea. The boundary was too precise for it to be a natural phenomenon. Then, at exactly 4 p.m., every person and animal woke up as if nothing had happened. There were small signs that time had passed, a bathtub overflowing, a man who had fallen onto his grill and burned to death, extra crunchy. Confused and frightened, the townspeople were greeted by hazmat-suited officers scanning their homes for answers. Jill, still dazed, saw a truck carrying what remained of Frank's car. Reality sank in. Her husband was gone. Not long after, Jill started feeling unwell at work. She wasn't alone. C, a close friend, visited Dr. Allen for a checkup and was stunned by the results. She was pregnant. Meanwhile, at the local church, Reverend George found Melanie crying uncontrollably. Soon, the shocking truth spread. Every woman in town was pregnant, even those who had no possible explanation for how. Callie's husband, Ben, had been away for work the entire time, yet she was expecting. Melanie had never even been with a man. When Ben returned, he refused to believe Callie, convinced she had been unfaithful. Jill, too, was pregnant. And when Allen examined Barbara, he confirmed she was expecting as well. What was most unsettling, all the pregnancies seemed to have begun on the day of the blackout. As panic spread, the town gathered at the meeting hall to discuss what to do. Some feared the babies would be abnormal, but Allen reassured them that medical tests showed no deformities. Then, Susan made an announcement. Any woman who wanted to terminate the pregnancy would have full medical support. But for those who chose to keep their babies, the government would provide all prenatal care, plus a monthly allowance of $3,000. The only condition? Susan and her team would closely monitor the children. Despite initial doubts, every woman ultimately decided to keep their baby. That night, they all experienced a vivid dream, each of them pregnant, surrounded by a strange blue light. Months passed and the pregnancies progressed normally. The women attended motherhood classes together, trying to prepare for the unknown. Then, on the same night, they all went into labor at the exact same time. Susan had set up a special maternity ward in a large barn, and one by one, the women gave birth to healthy, human-looking babies. Ben even returned to be by CA's side as their son was born. But there was one tragic exception. Melanie's baby was stillborn. As she lay in distress, Susan quietly took the lifeless infant away, but Reverend George noticed. When he confronted her, Susan explained that she planned to perform an autopsy and didn't want the other mothers to see a dead child. Days later, Allen and Susan analyzed the newborns. The babies had softer than usual hair and unusually narrow nails. What stood out most was their DNA. It was normal but identical, as if they all shared the same father. Meanwhile, Jill was home with her baby boy when she made a shocking discovery. At only a few months old, he had already learned to spell his name with toy blocks. Barbara's daughter was also developing at an unnatural pace. One evening, when Barbara scolded her for throwing food on the floor, the girl's eyes glowed eerily like a Walmart version of Superman. Suddenly, Barbara's body was no longer her own. Her hand moved against her will into a pot of boiling water. Her screams echoed through the house. Jill arrived just in time to pull her away, saving her from further injury. But at the hospital, Barbara was too terrified to tell Allen what really happened. The fear of her own child was too great. As time passed, the babies grew into eerie young children. They all had white hair, pale skin, and piercing blue eyes. Little diabolical Draco Malfoy lookalikes. They moved in perfect unison, lacked individuality, and never displayed emotion. It was clear that Mara, Allen's daughter, was their leader. The children even paired off like mates except for Jill's son David, whose destined partner had been the stillborn. As a result, David was treated as an outcast among them. Susan continued reporting to the government, noting an alarming pattern. Many adults had been seriously injured or even killed, yet no physical attacks had occurred. Despite Alan stepping away from her research, she remained determined to monitor the children's development. The government deemed the situation a national security issue and agreed to keep funding the project. One day, during their monthly checkup, the children revealed something chilling. They could read minds. Susan, attempting to block them out, imagined a wall, but the children were irritated by her efforts to keep secrets. When an eye doctor examined one of them, she noticed an unnatural color shift in the child's eyes. Nervous, she fumbled and accidentally used the wrong drops, causing the child to scream in pain. Frantically, she cleaned the eye and checked again. Its color had momentarily turned red. Moments later, Mara stood at the door, her own eyes glowing red. Without a word, she forced the doctor to pour the entire bottle of drops into her own eyes, blinding her. Meanwhile, Jill confronted Alan, arguing that the children couldn't continue in regular classes. Their presence was affecting the normal students. She urged Alan to teach them separately, focusing on empathy, but he refused. Later at home, Jill tried to brush David's hair, but he stopped her coldly, insisting he was old enough to do it himself. Sensing an opportunity, Jill cautiously brought up the doctor's accident. For the first time, David seemed to grasp the concept of empathy. The next day, David quietly walks away from the group. Mara notices but says nothing. He heads to the cemetery, where he finds Melanie drinking alone. When she sees him, she turns away, unable to stand his presence. She tries to leave, but David reads her mind and discovers something terrible. Melanie has been thinking about ending her own life. Meanwhile, the other kids decide to explore the old barn where they were born. While they are away, David's worst fears come true. Melanie takes her own life, just as he had sensed she would. At her funeral, George speaks out, warning the townspeople that the children are dangerous. Later, Alan visits the cemetery and unexpectedly meets David, who seems troubled. David confesses that he is looking for the grave of the baby who died. Alan is shocked. None of the children should even know about the missing baby. He explains that there is no grave, and for the first time, he and David share a real connection over their losses. As Alan stares at Barbara's headstone, David silently reaches for his hand. That moment of shared grief changes Alan. He no longer sees David as a threat. Instead, he sees him as a boy who is just trying to understand the world. He agrees to teach the children. During their first lesson, Alan quickly realizes the kids are different. They answer every question at the same time, as if they are a single mind. He tries to get them to think individually, but they struggle to understand why they should. Surprisingly, they have an advanced grasp of philosophical ideas despite their young age. When Alan is called to the principal's office, he starts to tell the kids what to do in his absence. But before he can finish, they already know. They read his mind and move in perfect sync, grabbing the correct books and turning to the right chapter eerily coordinated. While Alan is gone, the janitor stops by and eyes the children suspiciously. He tells them he knows they're up to something and swings his broom at them threateningly. The handle accidentally hits one of the boys. Instantly, all the kids rise from their seats, their eyes glowing. Their power takes control of the janitor, forcing him to walk out of the room. They make him climb a ladder to the roof, then push him off. He falls onto a car, his own broom impaling him. That evening, Mara visits Alan at home with a chilling announcement. The children have decided to live in the barn from now on. Alan will be responsible for bringing them supplies. She doesn't ask, she demands, making it clear that he has no choice. That night, the parents drive their children to the barn, dropping them off one by one. Jill begs David to stay with her, insisting that he is different from the others. But David follows the group, leaving his mother heartbroken. A few days later, Ben, one of the fathers, decides he's had enough. He drives to the barn, determined to take his daughter home. But before he can get close, one of the kids steps into the road, forcing him to slam on the brakes. As soon as he steps out of the truck, the children surround him, their eyes glowing. Under their control, Ben stumbles back into his truck and speeds straight into a fuel tank. The explosion is massive, killing him instantly. At the same time, Susan shares grim news with Alan. Every town with children like these has been wiped out. Governments have deemed them too dangerous and destroyed them, along with every adult in the area. Since the children can read minds and would sense an evacuation plan, Susan has been warned to leave Midwich immediately, and she begs Alan to come with her. Desperate for answers, Alan heads to the barn to reason with the children, but they remain emotionless. Survival is their only concern. When they attempt to read his thoughts, Alan quickly builds a mental wall visualizing an ocean to block them out. Mara, suspicious, instructs Alan to arrange for their departure that night. Alan pretends to agree and leaves. Mara soon notices David thinking about the missing baby and calls him out for having emotions. Elsewhere, George hides in the tall grass, aiming his rifle at the barn. But before he can pull the trigger, the children find him first. His hands shake as they take control of his mind, forcing him to turn the gun on himself. Meanwhile, Susan and her team pack up to leave as a riot erupts in the streets. The townspeople, furious and terrified, gather with torches, ready to burn the children alive. But as they march forward, a few of the kids appear, their eyes glowing. One woman is forced to drop her torch, setting herself on fire. The police quickly step in, declaring a state of emergency and threatening to arrest anyone outside. While the town spirals into chaos, the children corner Susan in her office, demanding to know where she has hidden their dead sibling. Unable to resist their power, she reveals the gruesome, mutated body. The sight of it makes David emotional, fueling his grief and anger. The others, however, are cold and calculating. They force Susan onto a table, placing a scalpel in her hand. Helpless, she ends her own life under their command. Not far away, Alan breaks into a construction company and steals explosives. Before carrying out his plan, he visits Jill and warns her that things are about to change. He kisses her and locks her inside a room to keep her safe, but as soon as he leaves, Jill breaks the window and escapes, determined to save her son. Minutes later, the police surround the barn, ready to end this nightmare. But the children step outside in unison, their glowing eyes sending the officers into a frenzy. A cop suddenly shoots his partner, then turns his gun on the incoming police cars, causing wrecks and explosions. The surviving officers fire at each other until no one is left. A helicopter hovers above, but the children's power forces it to crash into the ground. Alan finally arrives, hiding the bomb inside a briefcase. He enters the barn, trying to keep his mind blank. But Mara senses something is wrong. She orders the children to read his thoughts. Alan focuses on his mental wall, but they push harder, their combined strength overwhelming him. As Jill sneaks in through the back, the kids momentarily shift their attention. She tries to take David away, but they force her to stop. David, however, resists. In a moment of defiance, he shoves the others away and runs with his mother. The children return their focus to Alan, breaking through his defenses. They finally see what he's been hiding: the bomb. But it's too late. The explosion rips through the barn, consuming everything in fire and smoke. Jill and David watch from a distance as the barn is reduced to rubble. The other children are gone. So is Alan. With no home left and nowhere safe to turn, Jill and David drive away, determined to find a place where no one knows who they are. And to find out who those recaps on the right are, I suggest clicking them. Drop a like and subscribe for future uploads. You won't want to miss them. Grab your popcorn, enjoy yourself, and see you soon, my friend.